Good morning and welcome to the first meeting in 2020 of the Finance and Constitution Committee. It's probably an opportune time to say Happy New Year to everybody. As usual, can I ask that our mobile phones are at least put on silent and certainly won't interfere with proceedings. The first item on our agenda this morning is to decide whether to take item 3 in private, and members agreed. Members are agreed. The second item on our agenda is to take evidence on the European Union Withdrawal Agreement Bill, LCM, from Michael Russell, Cabinet Secretary for Government Business and Constitutional Relations. The Cabinet Secretary is joined by the following supporting officials: Gerald Byrne, who is the Head of Constitution Policy, Constitution Relations Division; Francesca Morton, who is a Solicitor with the Constitutional and Civil Law Division; and David Barnes, who is the Head of the EU Exit Strategy and Negotiations Division. I welcome you all to our meeting and invite the Cabinet Secretary, Mike Russell, to make an opening statement if he wishes to do so.
Thank you very much, Convener. I'll be brief, and a Happy New Year to the committee as well. I'm sure this will not be the last occasion on which I will be appearing before you in 2020. The principal aim of the European Union Withdrawal Agreement Bill is to implement the withdrawal agreement concluded by the UK and the EU on the 17th of October 2019. And I say quite clearly at the outset that given that the people of Scotland have rejected the proposal to leave the EU at every electoral opportunity presented to them, the Scottish Government could not and will not recommend that the Scottish Parliament gives its consent to the bill, which would implement that agreement in domestic law. But there are other strong reasons for not giving the approval as well, and they lie in the detail of this bill. This is the third iteration of the Withdrawal Agreement Bill. Members will recall that it was brought together at the time of the Theresa May agreement. It was then reissued in slightly different form in October and now has been reissued again. And the common theme has been a growing reluctance to accept scrutiny, indeed a dislike of scrutiny, and a desire to centralise power into the hands of the executive and obviously particularly into the Prime Minister, and to create a harder and harder Brexit as the bill has progressed. Let me give you just one example, Clause 26, which extraordinarily gives the right to ministers to tell courts how to interpret and what precedent to interpret. This is a thoroughly bad bill that presages a thoroughly bad Brexit. I noticed from the amendment to my own motion this afternoon that Mr Tompkins indicates that accepting the results of referenda and implementing them is the key issue. I speak as a member of the government that has accepted the results of 2 referendums and implemented them. Quite obviously the first of them because Scotland is not independent at the present moment. The result of the 2014 referendum was a decision not to be independent by the people of Scotland. That was implemented by the Scottish Government. The material change in those circumstances came in 2016 when the UK as a whole voted to leave the EU, and that decision was imposed upon the people of Scotland against their wish because they did not vote for that. But even so, the Scottish Government then proceeded to offer a range of compromises from the end of 2016 onwards, which would have avoided the situation in which we find ourselves today. Unfortunately, the UK Government on no occasion accepted any of those compromises and has pursued a harder and harder and worse Brexit since those time. There are a number of other provisions in the bill which no doubt we will talk about today, and I'm happy to talk about them. But the bill is not one that the Scottish people should accept, and it is therefore not one that the Scottish Parliament should accept. And I look forward to this committee session and to the debate this afternoon, which will continue to be the burden of my argument, and I hope that the Parliament will accept that argument at decision time today.
Thank you, Cabinet Secretary. Let me just begin by dealing with some of the aspects of the bill you just hinted about yourself. In a letter dated the 18th of December to yourself from the UK Government, they confirmed that they're committed to not normally using the power for UK ministers in areas devolved competence without the consent of relevant devolved administration. They say the Government respects and will continue to uphold the devolution settlement. However, this committee has consistently argued that providing UK ministers with the power to make statutory instruments in devolved areas without any statutory requirement to seek consent of the Scottish ministers or the Scottish Parliament cuts across the devolution settlement Is that a view that the Scottish Government supports? And would you like to tell us your perspective, please?
Yes, let me put it in the context of 3.5 years of negotiation, and tomorrow will be the 21st meeting of the JMC European negotiations. There has been scant, if any, respect for the devolved administrations, very little, if any, for the devolved competencies, and a view that when push comes to shove, the UK government can do precisely what it wishes to do. There is a voluminous correspondence between myself and various UK government ministers on these matters, but one issue will suffice, and that is the Independent Monitoring Authority, which no doubt we'll come on to. And I use it as an illustration of where we are. The proposals for this do not include the ability of the devolved administrations to essentially select the person who is speaking on the matters concerning devolved matters. It would be a very simple matter for the UK government to accept that the consent of the devolved administration should be required for those appointments. Indeed, you would think it would be axiomatic that that's what they would do. But that correspondence over a whole year, and I looked at it this morning, starting with a letter from Kwesi Kwarteng about it, and concluding with other letters that are still to be answered, there's been no concession on that at all. None whatsoever. They still intend to put into place a system which allows them to impose somebody, in the end without the agreement of the devolved administrations, or to dismiss somebody. Moreover, the bill as drafted now moves on a stage, because the powers of the Independent Monitoring Authority can be removed and given to another body. So, in actual fact, we could be completely ignored, not just not consulted, but completely ignored. And that is the common theme of how the UK has operated. And it's important to say so, because we have tried very hard to discuss and to negotiate. But actually, we've got nowhere, as this bill shows.
Well, Alec Rowley wanted to ask questions on relationship issues, and you've got straight into that, Cabinet Secretary. So I'm going to go to Alec Rowley just to begin this off, because that's the area he was interested in.
Yeah, thank you, Convener. I noticed that the letter from Steve Barclay, the 9th, I was going to say the 18th of December, he states, and I quote, in your letter of the 22nd of October, you welcomed the level of engagement on previous versions of the bill. I just wondered...
Suella Braverman, when she was the minister responsible for this bill, I mean, the original withdrawal agreement had a variety of ministers responsible for it, but Suella Braverman, when she was in DEXU, took responsibility for this bill. And to be fair to Suella, she was very courteous, and she discussed aspects of the bill as it was in draft form. And actually, that was a positive thing. And we felt, whilst we didn't, and still don't believe that in the end they would have changed the substance of the bill, there was at least a conversation going on. That has deteriorated. I mean, you know, Suella Braverman was and is a strong Brexiteer. You know, we do not agree on the issue of Brexit, but she recognised the importance, and she's one of the few, in my view, who recognise the importance of trying to establish a reasonable relationship on these matters. So her officials worked with my officials. I could talk to her directly as the bill developed. When she resigned, and it's so difficult to remember when people resign because there have been so many of them, but when she resigned, then the minister, I think Kwesi Kwarteng, who came in at that stage, really hadn't got a great interest except signing letters that have all these platitudes. And we still hear these platitudes today. I noticed the commentary, the response to today from the UK government in its press comment is to say that they work with the devolved administrations as if everything was wonderful. You know, it isn't wonderful. It's an extraordinarily difficult set of relationships which has got even worse since the Johnson government was elected. And the bill tends to tell you why. If you actually look at the bill, you realise why this happened. Because the Johnson government intends to do whatever it wants. Now, it may have won and did win the election south of the border, but it didn't win it north of the border. And, you know, I am absolutely clear and adamant that the people of Scotland have said that they wish the right to say what their own future should be. And that's the big dividing line in here. But, you know, I would be delighted to be able to sit down and to go back to where we were in the end of 2016, where there was a possibility that the ideas we were putting forward could influence where this was going. But actually the experience of 2017, 2018 and 2019 has been a progressive refusal to accept any of the arguments we've put forward and a determination to do things only their own way, no matter whether they have electoral support in Scotland or not?
I mean, Labour will support the government this afternoon for many of the reasons that are set out in the motion tabled by yourself. But we do accept that as a result of the general election, the UK is going to leave the EU. And therefore, it's this question of the relationship and what powers we should have as an equal partner going to the table, a partnership of equals, the nations of the United Kingdom. You're just saying that's not happening.
It is not a secret to you, Mr. Riley, that I believe in independence. I mean, you have known that about me since we first met many years ago, 30 years ago or something. But I accept that there is a place to work as equals on these issues, and I would welcome that happening. I have to say to you, it has not happened, and the UK government shows no intention of it happening. I do not expect there to be a revelation tomorrow at the Joint Ministerial Committee that everything has changed and we are now sitting around that table as equals. My experience of the last 3.5 years is that is not what they think. Now, if tomorrow we were to say, let us negotiate a way forward in this, for example, let us accept that the part of the UK that voted to leave is entitled to do so. Let us accept that the special status for Northern Ireland is taken as read. What special status could Scotland have in these circumstances? It wouldn't be enough for me, but it would be a big step forward if there was an acceptance that that is an issue and needs to be addressed. There's no exception that that is an issue that needs to be addressed. Just as I've quoted the UK government spokesman today, he or she, I don't know which it was, also said that the Prime Minister's produced a great deal that is good for every part of the United Kingdom. Brackets, but not Northern Ireland. There would be the possibility still of a special deal for Scotland. It wouldn't be enough for me, as I say, but I'd welcome it and I'd take it. But there's no sign of it.
Murdo?
Thank you, Convener. Good morning, Cabinet Secretary. You were very clear in your opening statement that the Scottish Government are opposed to Brexit. That's not a view I share, but it's one I respect. I'm sure equally you would respect my position on that. You were also very clear back in 2018 that the Scottish Government would not, as a matter of principle, be supporting any motion for legislative consent on EU exit-related bills. I take it that's still your position?
It is.
Okay. So in that case, really, it didn't matter what was in this bill. You'd be refusing legislative consent as a matter of principle.
Well, I would be refusing legislative consent, as I indicated, because the people of Scotland did not vote it. But there are a number of very good additional reasons for refusing legislative consent in this bill. But I do recall you used to be opposed to Brexit, so at least I am consistent.
Well, I am a Democrat, Cabinet Secretary. We had a referendum, and I believe we should exalt the outcome of referendums. But let's not get into this, because it's a matter for the debate.
No, I know it's embarrassing for you, but that's the situation.
Oh, I'm not one embarrassed, Cabinet Secretary, I can assure you.
Listen, Mr Rowley wants to calm things down.
No, I mean,
Alan,
given that we're, the result of the general election, as I said, we're leaving the EU, then I take it the Scottish Government will be pushing for an exit for the EU that best protects Scotland's interests. So a much closer alignment to the customs union, to the market. I'm assuming that as our representative in government, you will be going to that meeting tomorrow to set out the clear case for minimising the damage to Scotland.
Regrettably, I will be going to that meeting tomorrow. I can't say I'm looking forward to it. And I continue to argue strongly for the least damaging Brexit. And that least damaging Brexit was laid out in the paper that we published in December 2016, Scotland's Place in Europe, and its continued membership of the single market and the customs union. There is a version of that which is being implemented in Northern Ireland, which it would be possible to implement in Scotland. If tomorrow that is on the table and being offered, I'm willing to negotiate that seriously.
Patrick, you were also interested in issues to do with relationships, some of the stuff also the DPLR had written to us about yesterday.
Thank you. Good morning. Just to follow up from the quote from the Steve Barclay letter that Alex Rowley read out, this paragraph in the letter seems to draw a distinction between the previous versions of the bill and this version of the bill. It says, you've welcomed the level of engagement on previous versions, and the Cabinet Secretary's talked about Suella Braverman's role in that, and then said there's been a deterioration. The next sentence says, I would like to join you in recognising the engagement that has taken place between our administrations to develop this bill. Can you tell us whether there has been any level of dialogue in the development of this bill, and in particular the very significant, politically significant changes in the withdrawal agreement, moving matters from the withdrawal agreement into the political declaration, the bill's changes which rule out extensions to the transition period, which remove the requirement for parliamentary oversight at Westminster, which downgrade workers' rights, and indeed measures to protect child asylum seekers?
We only saw this bill the day before. There was no attempt to tell us or discuss with us, the changes that were made.
So it's entirely unclear then what Mr. Barclay is referring to in that sentence.
Yes, I mean, it's always difficult. These are sort of stock phrases that appear in these letters, I have to say, and there are many of them. And you can understand the level of politeness trying to enter into these relationships, because otherwise it would be even worse than it is. But, I read that paragraph as saying very clearly, we welcome the level of engagement in previous versions, which we have done. We've discussed them. I wouldn't say there was, they didn't say to us, do you agree to this? And if we said no, they didn't withdraw it. The day before the bill appeared, there were officials had a conversation about the changes in the bill, and they saw the bill then. That's it.
Okay, thank you. One of those changes that are referred to, clause 31 in the previous version, about parliamentary oversight and scrutiny, both in terms of the negotiating mandate, the ongoing discussions and the approval of any future relationship, and also requiring, the previous version requiring the negotiating objectives to be consistent with the political declaration. That's all been taken out. Acknowledging that the actual negotiating of a future relationship is a UK competence, very clearly. Is there a danger that this change makes it much more likely that a future relationship will be agreed and approved by ministerial decision alone, which itself directly cuts across devolution in more substantial ways than this bill does?
Yeah, let me just step back one step to say I don't entirely accept that negotiations are UK competence alone. If you are negotiating on devolved competences, then there has to be a role for the devolved administrations. The nature of that role has not been resolved. It has been under discussion for at least 18 months, probably longer, and we don't have a resolution of that. It will be a subject that will be discussed again tomorrow. So it's not an absolute, nor is it an absolute that the involvement would only be about devolved competences, because the Memorandum of Understanding, for example, recognises the difference between the devolved competence and those issues that affect devolved competences. So there is a sort of the whole area in there that I think we have to be careful about what we conclude about it. But yes, I mean, the lack of scrutiny, this lies within my opening remarks, the lack of acceptance of scrutiny, indeed the reluctance to accept scrutiny is very clear here. There is no role afforded to the UK Parliament, let alone the Scottish Parliament, in these matters. And indeed no role in the present bill in terms of the final treaty. Now, it is alleged that there will be subsequent legislation that deals with that. But, you have to be very careful about the commitments that are being made. Commitments have been made, for example, to the changes to the October bill, which haven't taken place. So I do not actually put any credence in commitments that are made without concrete evidence now. And the reality is that this will cut across devolution. I mean, there are elements in the bill which do so quite blatantly, but you're right to say that this vastly diminishes the ability of this Parliament to have a formal role. It doesn't stop the Parliament saying things, and it won't stop the Parliament saying things, but it does in the formal role, of course, and it stops the Westminster Parliament doing so too.
Thank you. I also wanted to ask about the letter from the Delegated Powers and Law Reform Committee in this Parliament, which was sent to you just yesterday, acknowledging this is an absurdly constrained time period that we have for scrutiny, that committee, this committee and the Chamber have almost no time at all. They have raised a number of issues, and I just wanted to ask whether you're yet in a position to be able to say anything on the record about the questions that they've raised in their letter.
If you will allow me, I'll be happy to address that this afternoon. I'm not in a position to do so here and now because I've been considering the letter this morning, but I will endeavour to address that issue this afternoon so that people have a response to know my response to this. But of course I agree with them with the constrained timescale. You know, I do recall massive criticism from Conservatives in this Parliament about the continuity bill. But the continuity bill wasn't dealt with in 3 days, and that's the comparison. So I will endeavour to address this afternoon.
Thank you.
Hopkins.
Thank you, Convener. Just in terms of this question of timing that Mr. Harvey's just raised, am I right in understanding that normally legislative consent procedures in this Parliament happen after the last amending stage of the relevant legislation in Westminster?
They can happen up to the last amending stage. Yeah. And they have varied, I think, in how we've handled it. Does Gerald want to address this?
Normally try and have legislative consent before the last amending stage in the first House. And the reason for that is that it allows the UK Parliament to reflect the views of this Parliament. We also acknowledge, though, that bills change at Westminster as they go through the second House, so there is the opportunity for supplementary legislative consent motions to be brought forward in the second House, but generally we try and do it before the first amending stage and the last amending stage in the first House, but it can, as the Minister says, go up to the last amending stage in the second House.
Okay, can I just add something to that, because I think it's important. There's a different procedure in Wales and Scotland, which we know, but in addition, on this occasion, Wales are supporting a series of amendments in the House of Lords, which they hope will make a difference to the bill. We will support their efforts in that, though I think the chances of that succeeding are minuscule. But we do support the attempt to alter the bill in the House of Lords. But I think it's right also that this Parliament, as Gerald has indicated, this Parliament's view is heard while the bill is still in the House of Commons.
Thank you. When are you anticipating that the last amending stage in the second House, which in this bill will be the House of Lords, will take place?
What do you think?
I'm not sure I've seen the parliamentary timetable for the House of Lords yet, but towards the end of January, perhaps, but I'm not entirely sure we've seen a timetable. I'm checking with Francesca, who might know. So.
Well, I'm told that if the bill is amended in the House of Lords, there will then be a ping-pong stage, and the ping-pong stage has been provisionally set down for the 22nd of January, I think is what I've been told. Okay. So, given that today is only the 8th of January, is it not... I mean, I'm just wondering why there seems to be a rush to consider this question of consent today, but not only in the committee here this morning, but in the chamber this afternoon, given that we do have another week and a half. A week and a half might not be as ideal as a month and a half, but it is at least some parliamentary time, Minister.
For the reason that Gerald has indicated, that I would want, certainly in this occasion, to make sure that the House of Commons has the opportunity to consider our position, and that's where we are. But we could come back to it. You may say perish the thought, but we could come back to it if there were substantial changes in the House of Lords.
Okay.
Thank you. John.
Thanks very much, Convener. Cabinet Secretary, I was interested in some of the comments made around Northern Ireland and how that affects us. I mean, I take the point, I think it's paragraph 58 of the government paper about Scotland being at a competitive disadvantage to Northern Ireland, which is a kind of general point. But also some of the specifics, I think clause 21 and 22 talk about the power and connection with the Northern Ireland Protocol. And there seems to be some suggestion that as well as UK ministers being involved in implementing the protocol, Scottish ministers might be involved in implementing the protocol. So could you maybe explain a little around that?
Yes, the power to amend the protocol does lie both with Scottish ministers and, well, there's a very broad powers that exist within the bill in clauses 21 and 22. The power to make the alterations does lie with both sets of ministers. But we're not entirely sure why it lies with both sets of ministers, to be absolutely honest. It would be far better that there was some greater clarity in this matter than is provided for in 21 and 22. But it does lie with both sets of ministers. I don't know if anyone wants to comment on it.
No, do you want to say?
I think I would just say we don't have details from the UK government as to what they would intend, what might be required under clauses 21 was 21 and 22. The way that the bill works, Clause 5 does a lot of the heavy lifting in terms of implementing the withdrawal agreement by transposing a lot of it automatically. So I think in the UK government's delegated powers memorandum, they expressed the view that much of what needs to be done under the protocol will be achieved by Clause 5. And there isn't a huge amount of detail about what might be in the regulations, but we'll follow that up in terms of what will be required.
There is a point too that amending devolution statutes by secondary legislation doesn't seem to us a particularly wonderful idea.
No.
Okay, to put it modestly.
Right. So can I suppose I'm struggling a bit to understand all this, but I accept there's a lack of clarity. I mean, especially concerning Ireland and Northern Ireland, this whole question of, you know, will there be some kind of boundary in the North Sea, and will we be affected? Will there be tariffs and all of that kind of stuff? So is that what this could be touching on, or we just don't know? Or
it could be touching on that. If you look at the issue of Northern Ireland and how the situation exists, it is absolutely unclear what will happen in terms of trading relationships, requirements for paperwork, how the system will operate. What is clear, however, Michael Duggan's point on this is really interesting, that we've heard, you know, from Brexit apologists for some time about the wonderful potential of the UK single market. The UK single market is in actual fact destroyed already by this one action. Because if there was such a thing as a UK single market, it now has a big hole in it, which is the Northern Ireland hole. So, you know, it is pretty extraordinary that the Prime Minister's accepted this, because it completely blows out the water many of the other arguments that he has had. But the confusion about this remains. I mean, I was in Galloway and in Stranraer in early December, and there were considerable concerns being expressed to me about what this would mean for Cairn Ryan, and we do not know. I mean, nobody knows presently. We had the extraordinary spectacle of the local MP, who is the Secretary of State for Scotland, complaining about the possible effect on Stranraer from a policy that he was imposing, and even he doesn't know what the effect would be of it. So we have to wait and see.
I could maybe add, in terms of what the UK government has said as to how the powers might be used. They've said that the UK will be required to set up a framework necessary to give effect to the obligations contained in the protocol, and that's going to require amendments to domestic legislation and retain direct principle EU legislation. So it's those sort of technical matters that might come up. As well as the implementation of the protocol necessitates more than just preserving the status quo. So I think it's looking beyond and what might happen in terms of, you know, the developments with EU law and how that affects the protocol and the compliance with Northern Ireland of those.
But we haven't really got a concrete example of where any of this might be. No. Okay. Thanks, Convener.
And I'm talking that you've got a supplementary here as well. Right?
Just to clarify what the Minister said, Minister, did you say that, in your view, amending devolution legislation by secondary instruments is not a very good idea?
Not in this bill. Not in the way it's
So you're not in favour of Section 30 orders, then? You won't be seeking any more.
I realised the moment I said it that what was going to happen here is that Professor Tompkins is going to leap on Section 30. The implication is on this bill. This bill is a badly drafted bill, and it contains powers which we think are undesirable. I am in favour of a Section 30 order, and if you have one in your pocket, I'd be glad to have it.
So just to clarify then, the government's position is that amending devolution legislation by secondary instruments is all right sometimes?
The government's position is this bill is a bad bill.
Okay. Alex Burnett.
Thank you, Convener. In paragraph 13 of Annex A raises a modelling the Scottish Government has done in regard to the costs of leaving the EU. I just wonder what information you can share as to the basis of that model.
Sorry, could you repeat that? I didn't get the first part of it.
In paragraph 13 of Annex A, it raises the modelling the Scottish Government has done in regard to the costs of leaving the EU. And I'd just like to know what information you can share as to the basis of that model, and whether that model is being updated as information becomes available. And whether you've applied this model or separately modelled other scenarios, such as Scotland separating from the UK.
All fully published material. It starts with the Scotland's place in Europe in December 2016 and runs through a whole range of published material, which is freely available. Some copies may well be left, but it can also be found on the Scottish Government website. I mean, we have published vastly more material than the UK government on what we believe the costs would be. We have compared it to other models, and indeed later this month, I think, we're going to publish another assessment which it looks at the impact. And this assessment, which we have commissioned ourselves, and I'm just on the social and equality impacts of Brexit, will be far more comprehensive than anything the UK government has even attempted. They haven't attempted to do this. So I'm pleased with that. But if, having reviewed all that material, you think there are unanswered questions, I'm happy to answer them.
Thank you. Gordon MacDonald.
We talked earlier on about the Independent Monitoring Authority, and you highlighted some concerns that you had about the appointment process. Yet the Steve Barclay letter says giving devolved ministers a strong role in relevant appointments to the board of the IMA. Can you maybe clarify what the situation is in your view, giving in mind there's two concerns? One is about the appointment of the chair, and the other one is about a member who knows about relevant conditions in Scotland, whatever that means.
Yes, this has been a discussion that's gone on since the first indication that there was to be an independent monitoring authority. And we've argued very strongly that if there is to be a member who does reflect, I was trying to get, with experience of the law and practice, there's to be three members who have experience of the law and practice in Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland. It has been our view, and it has been the Welsh view, and I think would have been the Northern Irish view had they been present, that those members should be chosen by the devolved administrations, or at the very least, their appointment should be agreed by the devolved administration. It should be no other question. Now, this was raised very early on in the process. There is a file of correspondence where I referred to backwards and forwards. But I suppose a definitive word on this comes in a letter to me on the 20th of October from James Duddridge, which I'm happy to make available to the committee if they haven't seen it. And that lays out in an annex the appointments to the board of the IMA. This is essentially their final word on the matter. And it runs over 2 pages, and it's a fairly complex thing. But what it says is, in the end of the day, they decide. Whatever happens, and no matter the amount of consultation that takes place, in the end, they decide. Both, in fact, in 3 areas. The chair of the body, so they choose the chair, and they can consult, but they don't have to listen. The terms and procedure, so it's not just the appointment, but it's the terms and procedure of appointment for those 3 members, and any decision to dismiss any of those members. And those are all, so in other words, it doesn't matter what our position is. In the end, it's like the Sewell Convention. In the end, it doesn't matter. And that goes back to Mr. Rowley's point about equality of status. If there was an intention, to have equality of status, it would be reflected here. And you have to ask yourself in these provisions, why? Why would they do this? Surely there's nothing easier than simply saying, yeah, we accept, that if you're going to be involved, we accept you don't want to leave. But if you're going to be, if you're going to have to leave, and we're telling you to leave, then we accept that there has to be some compromise in this. No compromise on it at all. Whatever is, and that's it. And that's where we are now. I mean, I went back to the Minister, to James, on the 22nd of October, made it clear I did not agree with that. It has had, I have to say, no great effect, and the bill continues to be, in our view, unacceptable in those regards.
And how much power will this authority have over devolved public authorities in areas of devolved interest?
Considerable. For example, and there is an issue in here that's worth examining, the Independent Monitoring Authority can inquire into the actions of a devolved public authority if it believes it is not observing the regulations. Now, it can do that. Now, the commitment from the UK government is that they will consult the devolved administration minister before that happens. And as a huge concession, they said, we can ask for it to happen. We can actually go to them and ask for it to happen. But actually, we can't do anything about it if we say this shouldn't happen, because they will simply do it anyway. So that's important. But the other issue in here, as I referred to earlier, is the powers of this body can be transferred to another body. And there is no guarantee that even these limited provisions would pass to another body as well. So it is perfectly possible that we could find ourselves with this being completely meaningless very quickly. And there's no way we can influence that.
Okay, thanks so much.
Cabinet Secretary, you yourself mentioned Sewell, and obviously this committee has been concerned for some time about the impasse that exists between the Scottish Government and the UK Government in relation to the Sewell Convention. We've always thought it needed to be addressed as a matter of urgency. Indeed, it might well be, if that area could be resolved, might be crucial to the future relationship between the Scottish and UK Government and the Scottish Parliament and the UK Government. I just wonder, is there any discussion ongoing at any stage at this moment around Sewell?
Well, you know, the simple fact, the Sewell Convention, if I may quote electioneering material, is no should mean no. You know, if the Scottish Parliament says no to something, that's what it should mean. The last time we had a discussion of that would be, I think, at the June meeting of the JMC in Manchester, where I continued to discuss it with David Liddington. There has been no discussion of it with the new administration. There has to be a procedure that means that the Scottish Parliament is able to say we do not consent to this, and that is the final word on it. Now, there has to be such a procedure or everything is meaningless. And we have not been able to even have that meaningful discussion. The previous Prime Minister was very opposed to discussing it. I don't believe David Liddington was opposed to discussing a means to make it work. And there are means that could be made to make it work. But presently, nothing. I mean, it's connected to, because these bits are connected, it's connected to the Intergovernmental Review. Intergovernmental Review has been going on for 18 months or more, almost 2 years. There were targets set for various things to happen. They've all been missed. We have no idea what the new government intends to do with the Intergovernmental Review. There is also the Lord Dunlop Review, which I have no idea what the terms of reference are. I have no idea what he's actually trying to do. Apparently there is some report that is due to be delivered to the Prime Minister shortly. I have no idea what's going to happen with that. And that's where we are.
Patrick Harvey.
Yeah, I mean, this does come to the context of this whole discussion, which, unspoken so far, but we all know that the UK government has already passed very significant legislation in devolved areas without the consent of this Parliament. We all know that it's going to do that again with this bill. If this Parliament decides this afternoon not to give consent, the reality is none of us expect that to be respected. We have a UK government that is willing to go through the motions of seeking consent, but there seems to be no indication that it's willing to respect consent decisions. Do you see any reason to think that if the withdrawal agreement bill is passed in its current form or anything like it, we won't have a UK government which then routinely uses the powers that it's given without the consent of this Parliament, or regardless of the consent of this Parliament, as a matter of course?
No, of course not. I mean, of course. I mean, if as I hope, the Parliament says that it will not approve the bill today, I think it's likely that the Welsh Parliament will take the view when it considers it. If there was a Northern Ireland Assembly, it'd be up to it, but there is a majority in the Northern Ireland Assembly, as far as I can see it, for Remain. That would have no effect. Now, that is a very serious set of circumstances, because it sets at naught the devolved process. But Scotland is particularly badly impacted because you could argue that Northern Ireland has a special set of arrangements that are in place. You could argue that Wales voted for Brexit. Scotland did not vote for it. Scotland has consistently not voted for it. And yet the views of its Parliament will be ignored. And you say that they've asked for legislative consent. I have to say they've done that in a pretty mealy-mouthed way, both in the letter from James Duddridge in October and in the letter from Steve Barclay in December. There is this extraordinary artificial distinction drawn between seeking legislative consent for clauses in the bill and approving the bill. Now, this is mere sophistry. It is designed to pretend that this is a process which is to do with the technicalities of a legislation, rather than anything to do with the political process. And that should be rejected, absolutely. I mean, we've heard similar arguments here today. This is about Scotland not agreeing to leave the EU, compromises that have been offered by ourselves and not accepted. And you're right, what will be an intention of the UK government to completely ignore the views of the Scottish Parliament, the Welsh Assembly, and, if it were in session, probably the Northern Ireland Assembly as well.
Angela Constance.
Thank you, Convener. Good morning, Cabinet Secretary. Following on from Gordon MacDonald's questioning on the independent Monitoring Authority, I wonder if you can state for the record what you see as the problems with EU citizens having to apply for rights that they already have.
Well, I think there are two objections. One is the practical and objection of the process. Last night in the House of Commons on the withdrawal bill debate, there was the opportunity for changes to be made to the settled status scheme. They were rejected on every single occasion. And that was very concerning, because the settled status scheme isn't working well for people. I have a number of constituents who have pre-settled status when they should have settled status, who found the system not to work for them. And there needs to be a recognition by the UK government, even that the system they have set up is not working in the way it should work and needs to be reviewed. So there's a practical issue that this isn't a particularly well-run scheme and it's producing results that are unacceptable for some people. But there's the political, moral objection to people who have spent, some of them, their entire working lives in this country as citizens, working alongside all of us, and are now being told that they will only have the right to stay and do so if they go through this process, which they find offensive, because it says to them, you are different. You're different from the person you're sitting next to, because you're an EU citizen, and therefore we are forcing you to get this recognition and to jump through these hoops. Now, I know people who've left rather than put up with that, and I know people who are immensely distressed by that process. And all of us as constituents, MSPs, will have met constituents who are in that situation. Now, I would like to be able to offer each and every one of them a guarantee about their future in Scotland, but migration is not devolved, so I can't do that. What I can say is I believe they will have to apply if that is the law, regrettably, but having applied and got it, then the Scottish Government should be prepared to defend their right to stay here if there's any attempt to change the circumstances or to act in a way that is frankly illegal. And that's what we should do. We should make that commitment. But I'd love to go further. And I'd also like to see freedom of movement retained, as it is immensely advantageous for Scotland in both ways. It's advantageous for our business and industry for people to come here, and it enriches our society, and it's advantageous for us to be able to go elsewhere. It is extraordinary that we are considering giving this up. This absolutely extraordinary boon and benefit, which you and I have experienced, is being thrown away and indeed treated as if it was something harmful. And we should be very, very clear that this is a major deterioration in our rights as citizens and a major insult to those who work and live amongst us.
Thank you. I want to move on to...
I think Alec had a supplementary to that. You don't mind, Angela? Apologies.
Yeah. Can I ask, have the Scottish Government got any stats on that? I certainly have talked to people who've worked here all their lives, their adult lives, their working lives, and are very worried and talk about leaving. Have we got any detail on that?
We have statistics from the UK Government about how many people have applied and what the rate of acceptance is. I think the only other statistics we would have would be people, and I haven't seen them, but I can inquire about them, as to those who have used the service that we have set up through the Citizens Advice Bureau. But that may be a very crude statistic, because it will not include, for example, people who come to see you as an MSP or people who come to see me as an MSP. There will be do we have any other?
I'm not aware of any, Minister, but I'm not the expert on that, so we can
we'll
find
out
for
and we'll come back to you.
Cabinet Secretary, I want to ask a few questions on the removal of previous commitments with respect to child refugees and workers' rights. As we know, the bill removes obligations for the UK Government to seek agreement or negotiate with the EU with respect to child refugees, some of the most disadvantaged and vulnerable children in the world, and also families who are seeking to be reunited. So these guarantees have been removed to be replaced with we're told there'll be a statement, but I wondered whether you had any insight as to what will be contained in this statement, and whether you agreed that there is a real risk of there being absolutely no guarantee that the UK will continue to sign up to the Dublin III regulations, which will result in the removal of rights for unaccompanied child refugees to be reunited with their families, either in the UK or elsewhere in Europe.
Yeah, I mean, if you were looking for just one single reason to reject this bill, this would give you, one of the many strong reasons to reject it. I have no idea what will be in this promise statement. Nobody has any idea what will be in this promise statement. But it is an extraordinary decision to, in all the things that you would decide to do, to walk away from the Dublin III regulations. This is advantageous on both sides. It's advantageous for unaccompanied children separated from families who are in Europe and don't want to come to the UK, but there are children in the UK who can go to Europe as a result of this. This is about bringing families together. And I cannot, for the life of me, imagine why any government would refuse to do it. I mean, there is some indication that because this is a European protocol, the UK government should automatically withdraw from a European protocol and then endeavour to put something in its place. But surely, even if you believed in that level of Brexitry, you would put something in its place before you withdrew from the protocol, so that there was no risk to any individual child. So, even with that explanation, it is the wrong thing to do. It is very damaging. We also don't know. I mean, it's not the same as and I know you know a great deal about this. It's also not the same as what they call the Dubs Amendment, to the 2016 bill, which sought to deal with unaccompanied children who did not have families. But, even there we saw an indication of this extraordinary antipathy to a humanitarian action, because the Dubs Amendment dealt with 3,000 children. And the UK government then said they would accept 480. And we don't even know if that number has been met. I mean, we have no indication as to whether that number has been or will be met. So I cannot imagine what motivates a government to behave in this way towards very vulnerable children. But they are. And that's in the bill. Or rather, not in the bill, because it's been removed from the bill.
Mm-hmm. Okay. A final question, Convener, is in relation to the removal of the provisions to safeguard workers' rights, which is to be replaced with a new separate bill further down the line. I suspect, but the Cabinet Secretary can correct me if I'm wrong, if again he has any indication about what will be in that bill and what won't be in that bill, and whether he could say a bit more about this removal of this particular safeguard in relation to clause 26, which is about the regulations to provide the lower courts or tribunals not to be bound by EU law in certain circumstances.
Yeah, I mean, I think we've indicated that the concern we'd have about the removal of workers' rights has a number of issues to it. One of them is 26, which would essentially further limit it, because the ability of the courts to take into account previous judgments would be limited, and that would affect workers in these circumstances. And quite obviously, it would lower standards and protections if you couldn't rely upon, and we don't know yet precisely what you won't be allowed to rely upon, but you wouldn't be able to rely upon previous judgments. But there are a number of strong reasons for objecting to this. One is the impact on the Scottish Government's Fair Work agenda. The Scottish Government's Fair Work agenda is very different from the UK Government's work agenda. We have a comprehensive fair work plan. It is important to us that this is observed. It is based upon the rights and protections that exist through the European Union, which are part of our system. If you're going to undercut and remove those, and they are going to undercut and remove those, I don't think there's the slightest doubt about that. Why you would believe that people who have, throughout their entire political lives, fought against extending workers' rights would suddenly be converted to continuing them, without legislative protection. I mean, you would have to be very gullible to believe that. The reality of the situation is this will undermine workers' rights protections, human rights will be undermined, and environmental rights will be undermined. I mean, I just don't think there's any doubt about it. And I'm not prepared to accept assurances about this matter, because the evidence points you in the opposite direction, and the evidence says, why would you take these things out of an agreement, unless you intended to interfere with them in a negative way? There would be no reason to do so. You would just leave them in the agreement. What I think the UK government fails to understand, and the hallmark of negotiations over the last 3.5 years has been a failure to understand what the EU is and how it operates as a rules-based organisation. What they fail to understand is if they are going to withdraw from the level playing field, that is a red line which has consequences. You know, the history of the last 3.5 years is if you set red lines, they lead to inevitable consequences. That's what we're seeing in this. And if this is a red line to get out of the level playing field, the consequences will be, at the very best, an absolutely low standard, pretty irrelevant free trade agreement, which has lots of ifs and buts and exceptions. Because the integrity of the single market is enormously important to the EU. And again, there has been no understanding of that. It's part of the failure to understand the Irish situation. The integrity of the single market is vital. And the integrity of the single market would be fatally undermined by somebody who was trying to be part of it, but actually would not observe the requirements in employment and other rights.
Thank you, Convener. Following the unlawful prorogation of Parliament by the Prime Minister, there were at least two other substantive pieces of Brexit legislation, the Trade Bill and the Agriculture Bill, which fell and had been subject to LCM. My understanding is that the Agriculture Bill is going to be reintroduced this month. As for the Trade Bill, I don't know. Can you give an indication of how many Brexit-related LCMs you expect Parliament to be considering over the remainder of this session?
It's difficult to say at this present moment. I mean, Gerald might give you an estimate, but let me, before I ask him to do so, let me just make a point about where we are with this. We have made a distinction again and again between those things that are required to be done to ensure that there is the body of law on which we can all rely, and those things which are political, which we will not accept. And, you know, there are issues, for example, in the Agricultural Bill, and issues to do with agricultural payments, and an issue of an error made by the UK government in the withdrawal agreement.
It's a gap in the legislation
framework, which will require amending in order to allow continuation of agricultural payments. And that will be done. I mean, we made the exception for the medical treatment in Europe, and that will be done. But, you know, what is needed to make sure we have a reliable corpus of law will be undertaken. I don't know if Gerald's got an estimate of what it takes. We've done an awful lot already.
Well, I think we're looking to reintroduction of agriculture, fisheries, as you'd expect, and as the Minister mentioned, the direct payments to farmers will be a particular piece of legislation. Francesca, is there any others that you will...
You've already mentioned the Trade Bill.
The Trade Bill needs to come back as well. So the ones that are...
Does the Trade Bill need to come back, or will they seek to revert to, is it the Ponsonby principle that used to govern trade relations?
Our powers in the Trade Bill, which are the intention is to bring those back to allow for the implementation of international obligations, particularly under the procurement agreement.
I suppose if I can rephrase my question, Cabinet Secretary, you identified in the earlier remarks that through each successive iteration of the legislation we're considering today, there has been a centralising tendency and increasing disregard for the devolution arrangements across these islands. Is there a concern that these bills, as reintroduced, are going to reflect that tendency?
You know, if we take the example of this bill, you know, each time we've seen it, it's got worse. You know, that is a distinct possibility. We should distinguish, and I make this distinction again, between those things that require to be done, so that there is not a gap in the law or in payments, as in agriculture, and those things which are a political tendency, which we will resist. So if you are asking if these bills get worse politically, we will resist them, yes, but we will also make sure that, you know, we do not create the circumstances in which individuals or groups of people are severely adversely affected.
Just finally, you had identified the sort of strained nature of the relations between your officials and the officials at DEXA. Is there more collaboration and cooperation going on in these other areas where there's a requirement to ensure that the body of law has continuity? Is there work being done there in a more collaborative fashion?
I think it's fair to say that the normal relationships, which, you know, I've been used to as a minister these last 12 years, you know, are at a low ebb from officials as well as from ministers. Ministers, there's obviously an element of politics in that. I think on officials, it's no secret that there's a considerable nervousness in the UK civil service about what is taking place and how it is taking place. But also, I think, a determination to do their master's bidding, which means that, frankly, they're not very friendly towards devolution. I don't think that affects the personal relationships, but that's where we are.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. I think, as we previously agreed, we'll take our next item in private. In the meantime, can I thank the Cabinet Secretary and our other witnesses for their contribution, and I now close this public part of the meeting. Thank you very much.